America First is inspiring a nationalistic backlash from our neighbors to the north and south. In Mexico, the government and businesses have revived a Made in Mexico campaign amid calls for boycotts of American companies and products. Support for President Claudia Sheinbaum is surging as she vows to levy retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. In Canada, stores are pulling California wines and Kentucky bourbon off the shelves with the message, "For the good of Canada." A new online shop is selling hats that say "Never 51," a reference to President Trump's persistent talk about annexing Canada, jokes that Canadian officials have begun to take seriously. Joining us now is Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Senior Counselor at Centerview Partners, and author of the weekly Substack newsletter, Home and Away. Richard, how did our closest friends, neighbors, allies get to Canada first and Mexico first?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is we've essentially declared economic war on them, trade war with these tariffs, which are inconsistent with the agreement, what was originally NAFTA, then the USMCA. They thought they'd entered an open-ended era of collaboration on economic matters, and suddenly they find themselves the target of American tariffs. They are, deeply, deeply dependent on access to the American market, overwhelmingly dependent on it. So this is a real threat to their economic, existence, if you will, for the foreseeable future. Then I think the president's also ratcheted up. You talked about, Chris, the talk of the 51st state. There's been some supposedly exchanges, really confrontational between him and soon-to-be former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, where the president's raised the possibility of redrawing some of the maps between the United States and Canada. Like other NATO countries, Canada is unhappy with American distancing in the security area. We could go on. And then Mexico, obviously, all the talk about going after cartels and so forth. That kind of extraterritorial American military involvement, shall we say, raises up some controversial pieces of history. So for all these reasons, our two of our three most important trading partners are essentially now increasingly defining themselves in opposition to us.
Yeah, they are our most important, our biggest trading partners. We reported on the bourbon earlier this week. Now we're talking about wine being pulled from shelves. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. California was already having a rough time, parts of it with the wildfires. Now this. There's concern that it will expand to the tourist industry. There's been anecdotal reporting about people canceling trips. Canada and Mexico, by far, bring the most tourists into the United States. UK's third, and it's a distant third. So I know that the message has been kind of no pain, no gain, but is there a point beyond which the pain is disproportionate to the gain and it might be recognized by the administration?
My sense is this is going to be one of those wars where there's no winners. Everyone's going to lose. Each of us is dependent on the other. You can't, even if Canada, Mexico's economic dependence on us is greater than ours is on theirs, still a lot of American industries are extraordinarily dependent on what comes across either our northern or southern border. So I think at some point there's going to be a mutual interest in finding a way to back down. I also think, just to make a larger point, one of the great strategic advantages of the United States is we get up every morning and our relations with our immediate neighbors is good. That has given us the luxury for centuries to focus on other parts of the world. Well, if we now have a situation where we can't cooperate with them, where we don't work with them against terrorism, or they see us as a threat, that will have implications, not just for our bilateral relations, but for America's ability to act anywhere and everywhere.
After Trump imposed the tariffs first on Canada earlier this week, Prime Minister Trudeau had a rather extraordinary assessment of what he thinks Donald Trump wants. Here it is.
One thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us, is the second half of his thought. Now, first of all, that's never going to happen. We will never be the 51st state.
Well, the New York Times is reporting Trump told Trudeau he didn't believe that the treaty that demarcates the border between the two countries was valid. That's according to 4 people with firsthand knowledge of the conversation. Canadian officials seem to be now legitimately worried that Trump is serious about this 51st state thing. Is there a dispute about our border that we're unaware of?
No, there's no dispute there, but we've generated it as an issue as part of a larger pattern in foreign policy. We've seen it with the challenge or threat to Panama's control of the canal, even though they had done nothing to deserve it. We see all the talk of Greenland, even though Denmark's been one of the most stalwart supporters of the United States in NATO, the threat to Canada and so forth. One of the ironies of this in the short run, it's totally upended Canadian politics. 6 weeks ago, the Conservative Party candidate was more than 25 points ahead in the polls against either Justin Trudeau or anybody else from the Liberal Party. Guess what? Now the 2 people who want to succeed Justin Trudeau in the Liberal Party are ahead of the polls, ahead of their Conservative challenger. It's a good lesson that we're not the only country that feels nationalism. If we bully too much, if we push too hard, others will push back, and they will increasingly define themselves against us, and that won't be good for any of us.
When you see Canada and you see Mexico rallying around their leaders, including, as you say, Justin Trudeau, who was down, 20 points or 25 points, could Trump ultimately and unintendedly be remaking the world order against himself?
Quite possibly, and I think we're beginning to see signs of it in Europe, where people are unhappy with American, what looks to be somewhat, to use a strong word, well, we'll use a safer word, distancing from Ukraine. Some would say abandonment. Obviously, the cozying up to Russia. In Taiwan, there's real questions about American willingness to stand by Taiwan against China. There's those who look at all this and they say, is the United States making the world safe for spheres of influence? China would dominate Asia, Russia would dominate Europe. That would mean we would dominate this part of the world. Well, among the many problems is people in this part of the world don't want to be dominated by the United States. People in other parts of the world don't want to be dominated by Russia or China. So American foreign policy now seems to be moving on a trajectory that very few will support.
Richard Haass, to be continued. Thank you. Have a great weekend.